And welcome back. Today we're going to continue working on building out our conditional branching statements by adding yet another tool into our toolkit with that of the else-if statement. Now, we are talking about branching statements here, and there are times when we are looking at our scenarios and saying we want to have more than two conditions, because sometimes we can't have two conditions encapsulate everything. For example, let's say we want to input a positive or a negative number. Okay, seems simple enough, but what's if we put in 0? Well, 0 is technically neither positive nor negative, and if we want to handle that, you would need another if statement because, well, you need some sort of way to differentiate that. And how can we do that? Well, in Java, the way we do this is with an else-if statement. Now, else-if statements, or multi-way if-else statements, as they are sometimes called, are not really anything super new, or we're not learning a whole new syntax here. Rather, simply just an extension of what we've previously learned with if and else-if. What happens is in a multi-way else-if here is that Java is going to go through each condition. It's just going to test it, see if it's true. If it is true, it's going to do whatever code's inside that block, just like we saw with an if or just with an else. And if it's not true, no, it's just going to keep on checking. So let's look at this with an example to actually start putting some context to this. So here we have a multi-way example. So you see we have an if block, which is, again, very familiar for us. We have an else-if block. We have another else-if block. And then we have our else block. You'll notice the only difference between a if and an else-if is that the else-if has that word else. Otherwise, these are structured exactly the same. Now, notice else still doesn't have any Boolean expression. It still doesn't have anything to test it. But else-if does have that. So, again, it's going to be very similar to an if. You're just adding an else-if. The way to think about this is choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, etc. And you can have as many else-if statements as you want. So you don't necessarily have to have 3 or 2 or 1. You could have none, for example, which in that case it would just be an if-else statement. If we, as soon as we want to test 3 conditions, well, we need to put one else-if in there. If I want to test, let's say, 4 conditions, well, obviously I'm going to need even more. So you can start seeing how it can get compounded very quickly. Now, how does Java actually check those multiple conditions? Because obviously, what if something has the same value or could meet more than one of those conditions? Well, if we look at the sample code, we said the first if test is going to see if it's less than 50. The second one is less than 100, third less than 200. So, for example, if I pick the number 10, technically 10 would meet all these conditions. 10 is less than 50, 10 is less than 100, 10 is less than 200. And of course, our else statement just says a catch-all. It's going to say if it doesn't meet any of these, let's go ahead and execute this. Which, of course, in this case it wouldn't. But which one of these if or else ifs would it actually use? Well, the way Java handles this is it's always going to start at the first condition and then work its way down. As soon as it finds a true condition, it's going to perform whatever code is inside that block and exit out. So if we use the example we talked about, we said 10, it's going to come here, 10 is less than 50, boom, and then it's not going to do any more. Now if we had this be, let's say, 150, it's going to go here, okay, is 150 less than 50? No. Is it less than 100? No. Is it less than 200? Yes. And so it would do this one and then exit out. It will never do the else statement, but it would go right here to where this else if is for 200. Now this is true even if a value meets multiple conditions, as we have just been talking about. There's another one if we say like the number of people is 50 here. All right, because 50, of course, remember, is equal to 50. All right, so it's not less than, so it wouldn't meet this condition. However, it technically meets the second and third conditions because both of those are true. However, only the second condition is going to be performed because, again, this is the only value that's going to work for this Boolean statement. And as soon as it meets it, boom, it's out. If we try to get into that third one, we'd have to change what this Boolean condition is testing in order for it to go to that third statement. Now, over in Eclipse, let's go ahead and just look at an example real quick. So I'm just going to go ahead and make up a quick if statement here. So let's just do like if num1 is greater than num2. And we'll just do a quick system out.println. Again, everything we're going to see here is nothing that we haven't seen before, because all this is functionally still the same. So num1 is greater than num2. And what's if I wanted to add a check in here? What's if I wanted to do additional checks? So for example, I could add a else in here like we saw previously. We could say else. And then the issue with this, though, is that we don't know if there's anything that's equal, for example. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this one num1 is, in this case, let's make this one equal to num2. And what we're going to do is add in our else if statement here to handle that. Because remember before we had to say it's equal or it had to be less than that. So we're going to do just else if num1 is less than num2. And we're going to add in that same statement, but now we can actually separate this out and know exactly which value we are. Num1 is less than num2. And so now if we look, we have three ways of testing this. So we have num1 is greater than num2, num1 is less than num2, and otherwise they have to be equal. And if we were to run this program as it is right now, we get num1 is less than num2 because we have the value 10 and we have the value 50. I could do the exact same thing for the user nums here. So if I'm going to go ahead and copy this and change these here to user num. So user num1 and user num2. And of course I need to initialize these in here. So let's just do a quick prompt, system.out.println, enter two numbers. And then I can just do user num1 equals kb.nextInt, and user num2 is equal to kb.nextInt. Awesome. And again, if we run that, entering in two numbers, let's do 4 and let's say 9. All right, we get num1 is less than num2. All right, again, printing out the same thing. Now, of course, we can make this more specific. We can make this a user num1 just so we get a little more specific here, so that we're not, of course, confusing this with our output above. And this works, again, the exact same way if we wanted to do a string. Now, what I'm going to do with strings, I'm actually going to show you we can do a little bit more. So let's just go ahead and prompt to get input for our string. And we're going to set input is equal to kb.nextLine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say if, for example, input dot equals, and let's go ahead and have that test for example, a word. Let's have it say, for example, computer. And then we can, of course, from there start giving out appropriate responses to system.out.println. I like working with computers. All right, or we can have our else if statements here. And just like what we saw with if, the same thing can be extended to else if. We don't need an else here, as we can see. So I'm just going to do if input dot equals, and let's go ahead and make this one say technology. And we do a system.out.println and have it say I love technology. Now let's just do one more here just to show what another line of code can do. So let's go ahead and add just one more else if. Put dot equals, and let's just have this one test for the word, or actually let's have this one test a variable. So let's just have input equal, let's do another string variable real quick here, and I'll just say another string, and just put that up there, and let's just do another string, and we'll just have it give again another print statement here. All right, and so now that this is up and going, let's go ahead and run our code. So we're going to get two numbers. All right, we get user num1 is now less than user num2. We're entering in a string value. Now notice it's not currently running because, again, we came fresh off an integer here when we did this input. So the best way to solve this is I'm just going to do a blank kb.nextAlign to go ahead and solve that so I don't have to worry about it terminating on me. And so now when we go ahead and run this program, enter in two numbers and enter in a string value. All right. We, of course, you see it didn't meet any of these outputs here, so it didn't give us anything. So if I just test for one of those here, and let's just go ahead and put in technology, you'll see that we get that appropriate statement.